Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia Online. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm a producer and editor here at the Free Library's Author Events Office. And tonight we're lucky to host not one, but two authors and their debut novels. First up is Uwem Akpan, the author of Say You're One of Them, referred to by the New York Times as a startling debut collection of short stories. It was a Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller, the 2009 Oprah Book Club Selection, and has been translated into a dozen languages. It was named to several publications' Best of the Year lists and earned the Hurston Wright Legacy Award and the Open Book Award, among other honors. And look at me, I'm the hypocrite now whose phone did the thing after I cautioned us all. So a professor in the University of Florida's MFA writing program and the recipient of many literary fellowships, Mr. Akpan has published stories and autobiographical work in The New Yorker, the Nigerian edition of The Guardian, and the Hekima Review, among other places. His debut novel tells the satirical story of a Nigerian editor who experiences racism and feelings of white cultural superiority lurking beneath the facade of the Manhattan publishing industry. Celeste Ng says that New York, My Village is that rare thing, a funhouse mirror that reflects back the truth as it maps the constantly shifting ground of grappling with prejudice and guilt, and how we might find connections and compassion nevertheless. And tonight's other author, Kirstin Valdez Quade. She's the author of the short story collection Night at the Fiestas, praised by the Dallas Morning News as a quirky, compelling, and polished debut. This book was the winner of the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Prize and was shortlisted for the Center for Fiction's 2021 First Novel Prize. A professor of creative writing at Princeton University, she has earned the 5 Under 35 Award from the National Book Foundation, the Rome Prize, and a Stegner Fellowship. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, and the O. Henry Prize Stories Anthology, among other places. The Five Wounds, Quade's debut novel, finds 5 generations of a New Mexican family converging in the year following an unexpected birth. About it, the New York Times Book Review states that Quade has created a world bristling with compassion and humanity. The characters and the challenges they face are wholly realized and moving. Their journeys span a wide spectrum of emotion, and it is impossible not to root for them. It looks like we're in for a treat, so let's get right to it. Uwem, Kirstin, thank you so much for being here. And I am told that Kirstin is going to read first, so I will see you all later for the Q&A.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Jason. What a joy to be here with you tonight. I'm so thrilled that we will get to talk about each other's novels. And what a joy. So I was volunteered to read first, and I will be reading just a brief section from my novel. And we agreed that we would each just say a couple brief words about our novels to sort of welcome the audience to our books. So The Five Wounds here opens during Holy Week in the fictional small town of Las Penas, New Mexico. And Amadeo, who is one of the protagonists, is he's really a kind of he's full of flaws, and he's an alcoholic, and he's unemployed, and he has just been given the role of Jesus in the village's Good Friday procession, and he is throwing himself into the role. He thinks that it will transform his life when his 15-year-old daughter Angel shows up on his doorstep unannounced and 8 months pregnant. So the novel takes place over the course of a year in this family's life. Angel moves in, and as Jason said, that it follows 5 generations of this family, all living at once. It's so I'm going to be reading a very brief section from the point of view of Angel, who again is 15 years old, pregnant, and this takes place at Smart Starts, which is the teen parent program she attends. Angel pinches the underside of her chin as she thinks. Brianna has told them to make a list of things they each need to make their own and their babies' lives better. The first few are easy. 1, GED or high school diploma and college degree. 2, a support system. 3, a car. 4, a driver's license. 5, a job. Here Angel is stumped. If she got a job, who would take care of the baby? So she adds 6, free babysitter, a good one. But there is no such thing, not really, not unless your mom or grandma doesn't work. Even Angel knows that. Briefly, she considers her father, then dismisses the thought. Christy and Trinity are whispering. They're best friends and knew each other from before Smart starts. We got pregnant like the same month, they're always telling people, which is either a crazy fluke or an organizational feat. Both possibilities depress Angel. Who'd like to share, asks Brianna. Today she wears her clunky sandals and a shapeless maroon sweater dress that is too heavy for outside. Jen raises her hand, tucking her silky, mousy hair behind her large white ear, preparing herself for the stage. An education. Jen smiles, anticipating Brianna's praise. A cross dangles from her neck, and in the lobes of those stuck-out ears, diamond studs glint. Even though Angel knows they probably aren't real, knows she could get a pair herself at the mall, she's still jealous. On her left hand, Jen wears a promise ring with a dinky little amethyst. It's my birthstone, she said, as if none of the rest of them were born in months with birthstones. She's going to marry her boyfriend, whom she met at church and who picks her up every afternoon when Smart Starts lets out. Angel's stomach churns whenever she thinks of her own child's father, Ryan Johnson, the way in geometry he always sat in the front row, grimacing up at the board. He always raised his hand to answer questions, but was only correct about 50% of the time. It seemed crazy to Angel to keep putting yourself out there like that. But the next time Mrs. Esposito asked a question, there he was, long skinny arms swinging in the air. Hey, he told her breathlessly once in the hall after class, I thought of a name for you, a math name. For weeks he called her Angle, or sometimes, delighting himself still further, Obtuse Angle. He was so persistent she felt embarrassed for him, which, along with the tequila shots, explains why she slept with him. Her embarrassment also explains, perhaps, why she hasn't told him the baby is his. All right, thank you. You're up, Uwem. I can't wait.
Hey, our audience, we are very happy to be talking in front of you. And Kirstin, I'm so glad that we are doing this. Your book is excellent. I'll say more. My book, New York, My Village, is about a Nigerian who comes from the Anang tribe, Anang ethnic group, my ethnic group. We are a minority of minorities. When you hear of Nigeria, you hear of the Yorubas, the Igbos, the Hausa Fulanis. These people are like 30 million each. We are maybe 500,000, maybe a million, maybe more, who knows? So he comes from Nigeria. He's an editor in Nigeria. He comes to New York City to learn and understudy publishing in a little publishing house. He brings with him an anthology of the Biafran War stories told from the perspective of our minorities. There were 30 minority groups in what was the Republic of Biafra. The dominant group was the Igbos. So he comes to New York City and runs into this racism in the system. He's in New York for 4 months. Imagine if you just arrived in New York and you're working there for 4 months. So it's a whirlwind for Ekong. And he tries to build relationships at the workplace, where he lives. And he's succeeding, he's not succeeding. He's got bed bugs, infestation. He's struggling with all of this. And then at the end of it, he ransoms, something happens, he ransoms before time. So that's the layout of my novel. I'm going to read for you the second day. Lands in New York City. Okay, his first day in New York City. This day is Sunday, so he's preparing to go to church. The next day, I woke up late and tired. After breakfast of eggs and bread, I set about dressing up in my native Anang attire for mid-morning mass. I put on my male wrapper, and a traditional dress and cap. The peephole assured me outside was okay. But when I looked, took the first few steps down the stairwell, I realized it was too steep for my own good. I was like a lady riding with her skirt up to her waist. I was in the wrong clothes for this sport. When I persisted on continuing down, I slipped and grabbed the banisters. I gave up. Luckily, nobody saw me. I scrambled back up to change into a pair of trousers and shirt and blazer. With the map app, I found my way through the square's madness, Times Square's madness, to the famous spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral. But as I would tell my wife and Father Kyobo later, in Nigeria, though the familiarity of the Catholic Mass brought nostalgia, this space was not for me. It was too beautiful, too hallowed, too imposing, and trafficked in too much history and tradition and tourists mopping at the altar like a magic show gone bad. Folks just sauntered in like it was a Wendy's or a stadium. No genuflection, no pre-mass rosary recitation, nothing. And no matter how much I begged God to save me from, I myself was distracted, goggling at this or that part of the picturesque architecture. Moreover, instead of listening to the homilist, my mind kept replaying the booming, arresting voice and then forgettable poetic imagery of the cathedral's late Archbishop, Fulton Sheen, whose homily tapes we had listened to in our youth long after his death. Today, the preaching felt intolerably flat, and the whole liturgy was as horrid as bad fiction. Like these diverse worshippers could not wait to eat communion and jump back into the Big Apple. It reminded me of John Updike's Picked Dirt, Church Going, A Dying Cat, A Treaded Car, where he wrote, in Manhattan, Christianity is so feeble, its future seems before it. Thank you.
Thanks for reading that, Uwem, and congratulations on the new release of this brand new, beautiful, beautiful novel.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you read from Ikong's well, I guess it's his second day, because I think what that section you read brings up, I think the audience can hear, what a sort of large-hearted and earnest narrator Ikong is. He's, I mean, he's just. I'm not a reader or a writer who is, really, really stern about having likable characters. I would say that some of my own favorite characters are not likable, but Ikong is so absolutely winning. I mean, from the very beginning, I'm so won over by him. And so much of it is because of his exuberance and his interest and his just large-heartedness. Everyone he meets with open arms and expecting the best of them. And, you know, in his, one of the things I love is just how much he loves New York in the beginning. And, you know, he's dazzled by Times Square. And one of the refrains throughout the novel is his deep appreciation for Starbucks. And so I mean, that's a long way of saying just how happy I was to be in his company for this
Thank you.
novel.
Thank you. I can say, you know, your novel, as I was saying, telling you before, what you've just done in this novel, it's so Catholic with capital letters and so Catholic small letters, universal. What you are doing here is so universal, so sacramental. And you know, how you are able to get the reader, you know, into the hearts of all the characters, you know, and you said this in New Mexico, what you've done with the environment, it's so sacramental. And I've seen people try to write religion and it doesn't really work. What you've done here, you've succeeded because it's a lot of taking this scholarly theology and putting in everyday life. You know, do you know the number of families struggling with teenagers getting pregnant and the issue of faith and alcoholism, broken families? You know, you write with a lot of heart, and it's so powerful. What I want to ask you is something that struck me, which is that you began all of this from a short story that was first published in the New Yorker, and you developed this into this wonderful, wonderful book. Myself, I began my book as a short story, and it grew into this book you love so much. So, could you tell us what that experience was like, growing
Yes.
a short story into a novel?
And then I want to hear about your experience because I never intended to expand this into a novel. Um, it it was published as a short story. It was included in my collection. I I thought I was done with it and had moved on to new short stories. And um, my now editor asked me if I'd ever considered extending it, and I told her no, absolutely not. I'm working on other things. And um, 2 years after it was published, I was working on some other story drafts, and I realized they weren't working. I was trying to just make an accounting of what I was doing with them. And I realized that in 3 of these drafts, I was dealing with basically the same family as in the Five Wounds. There was a character in each of the stories like Amadeo, who's, this deadbeat father and, sort of an addicted ne'er-do-well. There was his estranged daughter, and then there was his mother and their codependent relationship. Um, and I realized, oh man, those are the Padillas. Like there they are. I guess I'm still interested in them. And so I decided to try to extend it. And I think one of the questions that fueled the novel as I was trying to see if it could become a novel was, okay, so at the end of the short story, Amadeo has this epiphany. He, because he's trying to do the best possible performance of Jesus, he asks to be actually nailed to the cross. And in that moment, he looks at his daughter who's standing before him, and he has this epiphany that any actual change isn't going to come through this performance. Any real change in his life is going to have to come from his relationships with the people around him, that he has to be present with his mother, with his daughter. And so that was my question, so what happens after this epiphany? Is he actually able to change? And if so, how? Because I think, it's really hard to change.
Yeah.
And I think for much of the writing of it, I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake in trying to extend the story. And I sort of
Were you
felt like I
afraid?
was
Were you
I thought
afraid?
I was terrified, and I thought I was cheating somehow. I thought it was against the rules that like maybe you're not supposed to extend a story. And then finally at the end I was able to say there are no rules. I get to do whatever I want. So I can't tell you how heartening it is to hear that you went through a similar process.
Yes,
Will you talk
yes,
about it?
yes. I yeah. It's so similar in the sense that I came to New York City. I wrote this, could I now call it pilot? I wrote this short story, and I was very excited about it. It was the first story I was setting in the US, and but I could not get it published. Um, Editors liked it, and they kept telling me, give us a few more weeks, But what my New Yorker editor did say to me was, Uwem, this is a terrific story. Whether you're able to publish this or not, doesn't matter. And once that editor, Cressida Lejeune, says that to me, I can take that to the bank. So I went home and started developing this short story, completely terrified. That's why I bashed in to ask you, were you terrified? It was a frightening thing, because for years I was like someone who had jumped off the cliff, and I could see the ground. I'm coming down. I'm gonna smash into pieces. I've never lived through anything like that before. What shocked me was that I kept going. And the thing was growing and growing and growing. And before this, I had tried to write a novel, and I did not succeed. I tried again. I didn't succeed. So this third try, set in New York, I just kept going, like, what the heck kind of thing. And it took me years. And when I finished, Kirstin, my audience, it was so crazy that I had written like 500 pages, no chapters, no line breaks. That's how the first draft was. So I remember sending this to my agent, and she called me. She said, "Yes, when I've gotten this book, could you attempt to put it in chapters?" That's how crazy the whole thing. And then I remembered, oh, I should put this in chapters, and then, it was really something. So to hear you say that you went through the same thing, for me, it was almost like taking a kernel, breaking it open and trying to push out, the outside of the kernel to become a big skyscraper, a big house with a whole different architecture, and a cast you did not plan ahead of time. So Kirstin, when I finished one of the drafts, I was so scared of publishing that they may not accept this. And so I didn't go all out like you see now in the book, to criticize, to create scenes and chapters. And then I got to do it. So I had to create the character of Emily, the character of Jack, the character of Angela, the character of Paul Maher, the character of Bob Ham. There's another character in that public Chad, the agent. That was out of 13 years of struggling with this book. Those 6 characters were created in the last 2 years for the book came out. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating. And I love your description of it as a big house, because that is so much of my experience of reading it, that it's this, enormous space that, with wide open welcoming doors, and it's just so filled with people and so filled with stories. I mean, that, I think story is at the root of this novel. Of course, Ekong is editing this anthology of war stories. You know, perspectives on this war that challenge the sort of dominant narrative of the Biafran War. But beyond that, there's every character brings their stories to the novel, and so I mean, that's just one of the pleasures of reading it. And I mean, I want to talk more about Ujai, because she's such a delightful character, and her hunger for stories about her family's
Home.
village in
Home.
Nigeria, home. And she's from New York, but she's so ravenous for these details, and to hear her talk about the village of Ikot Ituno
Ekanem, yes.
Is, I mean, it's so wonderful. She uses such sensory language. It's as if she's been there.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, will you just talk about the importance of story? I mean, is this something you knew would be a theme? Did you know that it would be a novel about conflicting narratives and the importance of story?
What was obvious to me from the very start, for many, many, many years now, has been my hunger and desire to tell the Biafran story from the perspective of the minorities of the Niger Delta. Many people do not know there are about 30 minority ethnic groups in that space. They only hear about the Igbos because they are blessed with powerful writers. They are so blessed that though they lost the war, they are winning the narrative. This hardly happens. Normally it's the winner takes all. You're the one who. So the Igbos are in that situation where they lost the war, but they control the narrative of the war. So I'm very grateful to God and my friends that after 50 years, I've been able to, show another strand of the war, another angle of the war, which will help Nigerians and the international community to see the fullness of what has happened. So I wanted to write about this war. I also wanted to write about publishing. I wanted to write about African food, Nigerian food. Okay. I eat a lot of Latino food, your food, all the time. Chinese food, Thai food. I really go around eating. it's a miracle that I'm not a big balloon. So I wanted to do something about our African food. I wanted to write about religion. Okay, you had that hunger too. And it's so funny that you grew up Catholic and I was a Catholic priest. And we write these books that, really delve into, the issues in Catholicism, things we would like the church to think about, things that are worrying the people of God. So I had all these things. I did not always know I didn't know how to put them together, what format, what structure. So it was battling with this for years, just pouring these things out. Started to look for, craft, structure. One thing you asked me earlier on this evening was, how are you able to present us with so much information without this information getting in the way?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
dying to know because that, I mean, just on a craft level, that astonished me because, you don't want to alienate the reader by dropping a history tome on their heads.
Yes.
But I mean, this history is intrinsic to the novel and to Ikong's character, right? Personally, because of
Yes.
it shows up in his marriage, in his relationship with his priest, in his relationship with his best friend, and it's also his work. He's editing this anthology. So how
Yes.
did you approach that? Because you must have known that you had to educate, a
Yes.
typical American reader who
Yes.
wouldn't know this history.
Yes. I tried to look for, each time I brought in, excuse me, like a big historical information, I had to look for an emotional charge to surround that information so it sticks in the mind. Like in the embassy, the first time Ekong brings up Biafra and what was done to the minorities is in that awkward time when the embassy official is asking him to prove that his ethnic group exists. So that kind of shock, would you be asked this sort of question? That's when I slow down and bring that information and it stays in the mind. So I was constantly doing things like this because I know that if it's emotional, if the reader is emotional at this point, those bits of foreign historical facts I throw in will stick. It's like a gum. I like also what you have done with structure in your book. You take the church calendar, the first part is written in a Spanish. Is that Holy Week?
Mm-hmm.
Semana
Santa,
Santa. Yeah, that's Holy Week. And then ordinary time, and then Lent. Okay, it's beautiful. Once I saw this, I'm like, this gives, it rhythm. And you take the mysteries. The Holy Week is a big time in the Catholic Church, and look at the story you have built around that. So for Catholics worldwide, and a lot of people know about Catholicism, the symbols of Catholicism. Every, Ash Wednesday, some news organizations, they start talking about this is Lent. Lent has arrived. So to use that already gives your work structure. Okay. If not for others, the Catholic community, this is Holy Week. This is ordinary time. This is Lent. This is Stations of the Cross. Okay. Which is wherever you are in the world, the Catholic Stations of the Cross very seriously. So I have these two in my book because I wanted people worldwide to see these Catholic symbols that are the same, all over. So, Kirstin, I can't thank you enough for what you are doing for the Catholic Church in this book. Many people don't read strict theology anymore. A lot of our young people are leaving the church. What you've done now is to create this character angel, and she carries this, child within her, a teenage pregnancy, and the father is anything but an ideal father. The family is struggling, but as you've said towards the end there, love is always a gift and a challenge. I found that very powerful. And then you allowed Connor, when the mother points to the crucifixion, the cross being erected on the hill, and says, this is what Christ did to save you. The child is not looking at the cross. The child is looking at the mother's face. This is what faith is about. We preach too much instead of acting and showing. So I know we've talked about this, and you've said, look, when many Catholics don't like this, this book, they think it's too liberal. It doesn't carry, a lot will like this book. We are better off having you in our company than having you, outside.
I thank you for that. I'm not sure that a lot of Catholics would agree. I think one of the surprises actually is that I'm always a little bit surprised when I read about myself, and I'm being called a Catholic writer, because, and I don't, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, because I do, I do engage with those traditions and that history.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm surprised that, when that comes before, Latina writer or queer writer, or, these other categories,
Identity.
other identities. And, so I've had to sort of examine, okay, so what does draw me to writing about these traditions and these old stories, this mythology that is, that I grew up steeped in.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that when I think about New Mexico, when I think about my family history and, the place I call home, and my relationships with my great grandmother and my grandmother, and that those traditions, lighting candles with my great grandmother, on her altar, are part of are so
Yes.
much a part of my sense of self, my sense of history and my place in history, and it's, so much a part of the history of New Mexico. I mean, because of course the Spanish, the conquistadors, came,
Yes.
hell bent on acquiring land and gold and labor and all of this, and also, to spread Catholicism. And so I'm really interested in how those stories sort of make their way. They're so deeply entwined in the culture and in identity. And
Yes.
you mentioned, and I think one of the things that interests me, so the story started as kind of a joke. It was, I thought it was sort of funny that Amadeo, who's, really a sinner in every way, is playing the role of Jesus, and that made me sort of chuckle. And I was also interested in this very, very old tradition that still persists in northern New Mexico. These penitentes, these brotherhoods, of lay worshipers whose worship includes, physical penance,
Yeah.
self-flagellation, and
Yeah.
it has a really complicated history in New Mexico. I mean, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, um, journalists and writers came from white journalists and writers came from the East and
Yeah.
wrote about these practices and talked about the people as as these like really fringe zealots. I have a book that was published, I think, in the 20s or 30s called The Penitentes, America's Weirdest Cult. And, it was these really salacious reports about this practice. And, um, but these brotherhoods were so important to the fabric of village life. They were political organizations, they were mutual aid societies, they were, really essential to these little villages.
They were everything. They were everything. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's a very, good point. Because, and then you have Mary the Conquistadora. they gave this title to Mary, who is helping us, do this. And then the bishop in your book tried to change the name later on. Mary, I think Mary, the mother of peace, is what he tries to change.
I mean, that's not just in my book. So yeah, La Conquistadora is this little statue. She's in the cathedral in downtown Santa Fe.
Yeah.
She's beautiful. I mean, she's the oldest continuously venerated image of the Virgin Mary in the New World, I think. And people are very, very attached to her. I mean, my grandmother, she has this incredibly extensive wardrobe. My grandmother had a dress made for her and a veil made for her, and she was brought by the Spanish. And
Yes.
As this sort of mascot of their conquest, and her name is La
Yes.
Conquistadora. And then in the 90s, they changed her name to Our Lady of Peace.
Mary gets
without actually acknowledging, the truth of that history.
Yes, yes. You know what you said about how without you actually going out of your way to want it, your story is very stories are seen as very Catholic. They have all these Catholic symbols. The powerful thing here is that we have in today's world people who want to write these kind of stories, but since they don't have our background, having grown up in the church and being immersed in these, symbols, the stories don't, they don't work. And because in my fiction, some of my fiction classes, I see people who don't have this background trying to write about religion. And I say to them, maybe for the purposes of the story or the book you're writing, if this is very important to you, why don't you step into the church and actually feel the liturgy and see whether this can help your story? This generation of writers, our generation, we don't have people who have this background, and there's not many people are writing about religion the way you are writing, the way I am writing. But it's, it's something I don't think we can run away from it. John Updike wrote about his Anglican Episcopal background. Bishop Asenga Isaac, did the same thing about, Judaism. For me, it's your writing is so. I just kept reading. I kept reading. I kept, folding the, bending the pages because I wanted to underline, a lot of things. I don't know. I don't know. I love this. I love this book. I
Oh,
love this.
thank you so much. That means so much to me, especially
I
coming
love
from
this
you.
book, The Five Wounds of Jesus.
Well,
So bold to put this in front of the world.
so I mean, like I said, I think a lot of Catholics are not into my book at
Yes,
all.
I
And
can imagine.
New York, My Village is incredibly critical of the church as well. I mean, in um, one of Ekong's journeys in his 4 months in the United States is, going to these different church communities. And I mean, it's disastrous in a lot of the cases. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, it began as a functional ploy. Um, excuse me. I knew I would have to write about religion, but I got to the point in the that I need something exciting to happen. I need this journey out of New York City, and that was the impulse. And then as I went on, it kept developing, and the racist situation. Um, and then I had to look for what to do in terms of craft. When I wrote it first, of course, it was over bloated, was too long. And with time, I learned to control that energy. Because I've been a priest in this country, I've been a priest in Nigeria, I've been a seminarian here, I've been a seminarian in Nigeria, I've ministered to white people, Latinos, African Americans, Asians, Native Americans. And I know that we could do better as one big Catholic church. But sometimes our ethnicity comes way ahead of religion. And we begin to alienate other people. It's very crucial, Kirstin, because if you think of it this way, what will it take for white America and Black America to worship in the same church? When, the white Americans are going to sing about the delivery of the Jews from Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea to freedom. I mean, they roamed the desert and finally they found what they needed. African Americans are not going to look that far. They're going to look at their situation. They are going to say, we've been in this for 400 years. And therefore, they are going to sing Negro's ritual. Can white people in the same church hear their ancestors being called slave owners and compared to the Egyptians? This is what is at stake. And so over time, the African Americans have had to have their own Catholic, churches. St. Peter Clever, St. Benedict de Moor, because these two people, the descendants of the slaves and the descendants of the slave owners, can they share the same spirituality? This is what the church has to figure out a way to, to make everyone feel they belong. And it's not just here. When the bishops in Rome had a meeting some, is it 3 years ago? The German bishops said the African bishops could not speak, they shouldn't speak. How could you say the African bishops could not speak in a worldwide meeting of bishops? Why? Okay, Russian bishops could speak, Chinese bishops could speak, Latino bishops could speak, and we were told we couldn't speak. So these tendencies are there. We are human beings. So I had to do this. I've always loved the baptism scenes in the movie The Godfather. They're very iconic. I had always wanted to write about an iconic church, scene. Maybe I'll succeed in my next book.
Yeah.
So shall we bring in a Jason?
Absolutely.
Okay. Jason, come.
Yeah, so we have a few questions here in the box, and I'll just start at the top. This question asker asks, which is harder, realizing there are no rules or finding the energy to continue to write into a mystery full of discomfort? Intriguing. I guess we'll ask that of both of you.
Well, gosh, you know what? I think they are both so essential, at least to my writing process. I mean, I'm not a writer who outlines. I often have no idea where the story is going. I mean, when I decided that I was going to extend this story into a novel, the only thing I knew is that it would take place over the course of a single year. That was the constraint I gave myself. Otherwise, I really didn't know where it was going to go. And so that's what I was doing, was writing into the mystery. And it was uncomfortable, and it was also thrilling. I mean, because it's so fun to pursue mystery. It's so fun to get to know characters better. I think of it as, getting to know actual people in my life. I mean, I love that journey, getting to know people. So it's all hard, and it's all all exciting too.
Yeah, that's true. Jason and the audience, here is the deal. You guys have read a lot of books. We have read a lot of books. We even teach fiction writing. But I tell you, when you begin to write, all that knowledge sometimes goes out of the window, and you are flailing, you are struggling. So each book, you have to discover each book. You have to teach yourself how to write each book, each story. And it could be frightening. The mysterious part of it is there. Don't let anybody tell you there's no serendipity, there's no luck, there's no grace, there's no mystery. No, there's a lot of this. And that's why sometimes it's terrifying. But what I always say to my students is, ask yourself, the little you've written, where did this come from? You can't tell. So what do we do to nourish that source? That source can also provide maybe hope and comfort that it could happen. The thing would come together. So the element is there. You may know everything about fiction, and it doesn't come together. So that mystery and how you humble yourself to stay that cause, I think it's crucial.
This question is for Uwem. I read your book of stories when it was released, and so many of the harrowing scenes live on in me. I wonder if you were intentionally turning away from the trauma of those stories in your new book.
I don't know. It's like this book is traumatic enough, if you ask. What I have now is, traumatic. But this is what I was saying to Kirstin earlier tonight. I had to figure out a way to make sure it wasn't didactic. And that scared me for years. And it was my editor who said to me, "Well, don't be afraid. The book is so painful in some parts and so funny in other parts. These extremes are not going to allow the book to appear didactic. So connect the dots a bit for the sake of the reader. And I took that advice. It frightens me if I write and someone says, oh, this is didactic. I feel defeated. That's how I feel. I don't want it to be didactic. So what I can say is my first book, I intentionally backed myself into a corner to write about issues that bothered me in different parts of Africa. So it came out as a book of, tragedy. The children, the characters are disappearing at the end of, the stories. So take it this way, that some of them have finally disappeared. They've run out. They're here in the US. And what do they want? They want to run back to Africa, like the kids that Kirstin is talking about, Ujai. Ujai is burning with desire to go back home, a place she's never been to, because we hear so much from our parents, how home was, how their childhood, was. And, our children, the aspirant children, they want to go back and help and experience, all of this. So I wanted to do something different, set a story in America. It has turned out to be America, Argentina, China, Australia, every place I could think of, I threw into the book.
Well, I have a final question for both of you, and it was something I've been thinking about throughout the talk. And we were discussing a little bit in the green room before we came on here, like, oh, another Zoom, but Zoom's great also because, we didn't have this kind of thing, 20 years ago to connect. And I know it's in every book discussion and literary thing, there's some mention of the pandemic, but I was thinking about it, and both of your books are about people coming together in a physical space in very different ways. I mean, Uwem, a lot of your people are strangers, and it's, very much the opposite of that intimacy of family in Kirstin's book. So I guess I was just wondering, two things from each of you. Really, has all of this affected, like, not just your writing and, doing it and imagining character and putting pen to paper and the difficulty of all that, but has the last year and a half or however long, 80 years, however long it's been now, is that informing your writing going forward as far as the way people make connections in your stories and novels? Kirstin first.
That's such a good question. I don't know that I'm seeing, direct effects, but certainly, I mean, the last year and a half has made me personally just so incredibly grateful for the people in my life. I think it's had that effect on so many of us, but so I mean, I think my fiction has always been about sort of the connections between people and what we owe each other and the ways we can wound each other and also heal each other, and what. So, but I think these sort of themes have been just so much on my mind, and I've been just incredibly moved and grateful for these opportunities to
Justin, I hate the pandemic. The pandemic is horrible. I hate it. I'm dying to see it disappear, and so we could have some normalcy. And I hope it does. It's too disruptive. But as Kirstin has said, it underlines the need for human touch, community, If you were stuck alone in the pandemic, as I was, it wasn't funny. I I didn't I couldn't meet with my students anymore. I could not meet with my fellow teachers. I was now living on Zoom. Um, Community is very important. The human touch is very important. Uh, Imagine what the animals looked around, they saw that these human beings had disappeared. They started coming out. That's how frightened we had, become. I hope I pray to God that this kind of thing disappears or gets us back to where you know, and we are getting, we are getting there. But it's been a horrible, horrible time for me. Whether it has inspired me to write, I would rather write without the pandemic. That's how I would put it.
Well, I think this is a terrific place for us to end. And I tell you what, we'll all get our acts together and we'll see you in person for the next book in our lovely auditorium, I hope. And thank you for holding the books up. This is great advertising. Yeah, The Five Wounds and New York, My Village, those are the books. Uwem, Kirstin, thank you both so much for doing it. Congratulations on your success. And yeah, again, we'll see you for the next one. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Kirstin. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. What a joy this was. Thanks, Uwem.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.